Josh Retro Dad. We're here to talk about the Portland Retro Gaming Expo 2024. Taking place Friday, Saturday, Sunday, the 27th, the 28th, and 29th. 3 days of action-packed gaming, merchandise, gaming, panels, discussions, all about video game love. I've gone every year since 2012. Well, last year, 2023's Portland Retro Gaming Expo was officially my last year of doing coverage. Although, this year I recorded so much I could do its own episode. It'll definitely show up in the retrospective. Believe me, it'll be in there now. Let's talk about the event itself. I arrived with my standees, those Final Fantasy Standees that I bought a few weeks earlier during the $100 challenge, hoping to make at least $1,000, or at least my money back to get more games for Sunday. The auction took place Saturday night. One thing I didn't talk about in a previous episode, I was a backup panelist. I signed up to talk about gameplay or game tapes. Still might work on that documentary. It might be one of my projects I work on. I'm really big into niche video game memorabilia like that, especially VHS tapes. And I had a whole discussion talking about it, kind of talk about what they say.
Rescue April by calling in Donatello against Bebop.
It is the 90s, but it is like a Let's Play more than just a walkthrough. It's a little bit of a combo. My topic wasn't picked, suggested about doing a second topic, and I was going to do a second topic talking about collecting 2024, doing a series like the $100 challenge. I decided against that. I prefer my original topic about VHS video game tapes. So being a backup panelist, I got a media pass, the first year I've ever gotten one. So I got in early. I could walk around, look what I want, almost like a VIP pass, which was really cool. So I dropped out my standees. So here I am talking a little bit about the event before it opens up.
I'm here at Portland Retro Gaming Expo 2024. Got this kind of badge this year, which is cool. It is epic, guys. You come here and see everything. The arcade this year is outstanding. It's amazing.
Now, one thing about this event that was unique to the previous years, we've always had like a little bit of vendors show up on Friday. A third of the vendors were actually selling stuff on Friday. So I had a list, and this list had everything from NES to Sega Saturn. Last year, I was on a Sega Saturn kick. I'm still on a Sega Saturn. But during this $100 challenge, mostly I got Super Nintendo games. I had a lot of Super Nintendo games on the list too. A lot's relative, let's just say I had a decent amount. So I said no coverage, but I gotta talk a little bit about the event. It was spaced out really well this time. The best layout they've had. I felt sorry for some of the people that had like the little knick-knack stuff. They kind of got washed away by the video game vendors. So this is day one. So having a third of vendors at your fingertips is a different experience. Pretty much right off the bat, I bought Wayne's World for like $5. Wayne's World on the Super Nintendo, it's worth about $15. Not the best game. I still have my NES copy. Used to have the Game Boy copy, which I plan on getting again maybe someday. Wayne's World on the Super Nintendo was a game I also had before. Party on, Wayne. Party on, Garth.
Wayne's World, party time, excellent!
I bought Command & Conquer for the Sega Saturn. Command & Conquer is a game my friends introduced me to, played so many hours of. Always enjoyed and always loved Command & Conquer, but I'm happy to have it on the Sega Saturn. So this will be interesting, playing Command & Conquer on the Sega Saturn. I got Space Jam, game I've never played, also for the Sega Saturn. It's worth $40 market value. Space Jam on the Sega Saturn. So I got day one, Road Rash for the Sega Saturn. Mass Destruction. I also got that day one from the same seller. WWF In Your House for the Sega Saturn. One of the few wrestling 16-bit era games I never played. I was really excited about this one. It was on my list last year. I just didn't get it. Was Creature Shock. Now, I did find Pro Sport Hockey. I was considering getting it. I wanted to wait. One seller had a bunch of Super Nintendo games, and they were really under market. He did have Casper. I kind of regret selling my Casper. One of those games I have a weak spot for. Also got Legend, another game that's been on the list for a very long time. Dragon View. And then Fire Striker. I talked about that earlier this summer. I couldn't remember the name of the game. Kind of a really interesting, fun game. Could be 2 players. Kind of challenging. Game that was on my list for a little bit. I got Fire Striker from the same guy. And one other Super Nintendo game, Mega Man Soccer. For a decent price. One I've never played. I was never really interested in it, but it was a decent price. I was like, well, I'm kind of interested in playing this. Pretty much all my Super Nintendo games were taken care of that day. Didn't get any other Super Nintendo games at this con. Day 1, I was also looking for a Game Boy, Mr. Do. No one had Mr. Do. Not even other regions. I was looking for Mr. Do USA. Game I regret getting rid of. Is impossible really to find. Not impossible, improbable to find, let's just say. I looked around for it. Couldn't find it. But I did bump into Casper for the Game Boy again. A game that I was surprised I don't have anymore. I thought I owned it. It'll go well with the Super Nintendo. Casper I got. Kind of a soft spot for that Casper game on the 8-bit and 16-bit. And I got Fist of the North Star. Fist of the North Star is not like the NES game. It's like a one-on-one fighting game. Casper's worth 10 and Fist of the North Star is 10. That was day 1's purchases. I went away from certain games as I already spent a lot of my money. I spent about almost 60% of my budget. I didn't think that was going to happen. I was going to spend most of my money on day 2. I looked at a lot of cool stuff going, I wonder. I decided, let's save some more money for day 2. So now we're at day 2. It's going to be really busy today. All the vendors are open now. All of them. Plus, we have the auction that night. I liked seeing what they had for the auction. Fingers crossed that was going to go well that night. I was on a hunt for games. Looking around for stuff. I went to SideQuest Games. Got Beavis and Butthead for the Game Boy. A game I used to own. So I got Dragon Warrior Part 3. I was not originally going to get these type of games anymore for the NES, but I bought Part 1 and Part 2 because they're on Gameplay or Game Tapes to do that video.
These tips should start you well on your way through Dragon Warrior 2.
Now I gotta find Part 4. Found NBA Jam Extreme for the Sega Saturn. Again, it's a game I've owned before on the PlayStation. Never on the Sega Saturn. I've only had the Sega Saturn for a couple years. It's just another version of NBA Jam. I still prefer TE. TE's my favorite NBA Jam. It's one of my favorite arcade games. Battle Arena Toshinden Remix for the Sega Saturn. Game I've not played either. Years ago, I remember finding the PlayStation 1 version. Almost getting that, but I got it for the Sega Saturn. I find Killer Instinct for the Game Boy. Really cheap. Once again, a game don't have anymore. Enjoying ourselves, having a good time, and then the fire alarm goes off, and we all have to go outside.
The self-destruct sequence has been activated. Repeat, the self-destruct sequence has been activated. This sequence may not be aborted. All employees proceed to the emergency car at the bottom platform.
All employees proceed to the bottom platform. All employees proceed to the bottom platform.
I thought, prank? It was a glitch in the system. Kind of smelled like burnt pizza, and that was a rumor that someone burnt some food and the smoke detector went off. Here's an inside sneak peek what happened behind the scenes. During the fire alarm, someone got their stuff stolen. Some of the vendors. Some of the vendors refused to leave, even told to leave. They would not leave because thievery was high at this con, which is sad. So I do a little bit of reporting outside. I threw it on another platform, even on YouTube. And so we finally get back in. I'll go right for the hunt. So I did bump into Conflict for the NES. I think I got it for $10 or 15, one of the two. It's another game I used to own. Like all these games I'm going to get for the NES, I've owned them. Super Jeopardy for $5 or whatever. It was cheap. I go to a couple of booths in the back, and they had a lot of NES games. I got Splunker for the NES. Also got Defenders of Daikron City, a game I've owned multiple times CIB. This is the third time I've owned the game. This time it's just loose. Chubby Cherub for the NES. Pretty rare NES game. It's one of the earlier NES games. Not the best. It's not a game you see every day. Glad to have it again because that was one of the last NES games I had in the old collection. And I did get one higher NES game off my list. Jimmy Connor's Tennis, another kind of rarish NES game. You don't see it very often. It's a tennis game, not the best. but it's one that's relatively uncommon. I'm still thinking, should I get that Pro Sport Hockey? Came across Frank Thomas's Big Hurt Baseball. Now, this is a huge throwback to the $100 challenge. I got the display, I got the Super Nintendo CIB, and now I have the Sega Saturn version. So Frank Thomas's Big Hurt Baseball seems to be a game that just keeps creeping into the $100 challenge. I go to Pat's panel. I bought his N64 book. I forgot to mention that. Pat says his favorite book so far. It is really well detailed. I prefer the NES one because NES is my favorite console, but this one's a nice addition as well. I can go through it for games, especially for N64 games I think about getting. So I was really happy to get it. And I go to another panel too about Sega. If you look at Sega, what they did, they really were innovative. They did take a little bit more risk sometimes than Nintendo did. Then the event closes down. The arcade's still open. The showroom floor closes. And that night is the auction. Josh Kemp passed away recently, and a lot of the event was dedicated to him and his family. Josh Kemp is a guy a lot of us knew. My wife knew him because my wife went to school with him and did theater with him. And they did a lot of nice things for his family. A lot of money was donated. There's a lot of interesting stuff up there to see. Game Boy display I really liked. It was all about getting games the next day. I still have a little bit of my budget left over. Not a whole lot, a little bit. So I was waiting to see what happens. When I showed up to drop off my displays, I also brought the Final Fantasy VII extra copy I had. It wasn't the Masterpiece Edition, it was just an extra copy I had. They wouldn't take it in because they said prove the displays, that's it. That's important what's going to happen at the auction. First item is mine, the Final Fantasy VII, and they're supposed to start it at $200. At least if they sold at $200 a piece, I only lose $200. If it goes to $300, I at least break even. They start at $700 because that's what it sold for, the comps. On eBay, the Final Fantasy VII one sold for $800. I was even told that that Final Fantasy VII one has sold up to $1,000 before. The one with the 4 games with Buster, Sword, Cloud in the middle sold for $550. I was offered $1,250 for both of them. So they start at $700. No one bids. I kind of go, whoa, what the? They butchered it right off the bat. You know what else kept saying? It comes with the game. I'm like, what? You guys didn't take the game. I don't have the game. The game's at the house. So I get texts from the auction panel. Start off at $200. So let's fast forward. So they do a couple more auctions. Go back to the Final Fantasy VII auction. This time they start out at $200. It sells for $300. $300 with game, which I don't have. Okay, I broke even. Work it out with the guy who bought it. Was a really cool guy. I bid on the Game Boy Art one. We're kind of go back and forth until Josh says only so many of these are made. And then all these other people started bidding. So I didn't bid past that. So then it comes up to my 4-panel one. He starts it off high again. It doesn't sell. And then I get another text and I'm like, nope, take that one home. I wanted to keep one of them anyway. So that was pretty much the auction. It was a disaster to me. A $750 bath. I had to come back the next day with the game. The auction's done. I go home. And now it's time for day 3 of the Portland Retro Gaming Expo. I bump into right away something you used to have in the collection. Something I talked about during this challenge. Where in the world is Carmen Sandiego CIB for the NES? Has the encyclopedia and everything. That's really all I got before the doors opened. A couple more Sega Saturn games. I bought Off-World Interceptor Extreme, another racing game. It was relatively cheap. Zendor for the Sega Saturn. I got that. Also got Scud the Assassin for the Sega Saturn. And I got a decent price off of it. And it's a game I've looked at before, but I was like, okay, finally got to get it. I got this for $13. My old copy was moldy and nasty. I got it just for that Sega Saturn Adventure video, so I got a replacement copy. Still looking around, a couple things I saw from day one I was kind of interested in still. It's still crowded. The whole event was busy every single day. Prices, they were decent. I had some people trying to get prices that they were a couple of years ago, and those did not move. I noticed a lot of vendors were selling things reasonably meet up with my buyer. He thought the auction was off too, which actually made me feel better. Saw another YouTuber, 8-Bit Joystick. We had a little duel. Check out his stuff. You know, he goes around town. He goes to the events. I kept going back to a couple of the same vendors. And one of the vendors I got a bunch of Sega Saturn games from, I didn't realize he had a bunch of NES boxes. So I got Conquest of the Crystal Palace box. I got Solomon's Key. I used to have an X rental cut box. Third World Runner, the biggest one. Battletoads. So I looked around for some of the manuals and I actually found the manual for Battletoads. And I also got the Adventure Island 2 manual. So that now is complete. So those are all the retro games I got at the Portland Retro Gaming Expo. I did get a stack of limited run games. The Valis collection has Rocket Knight and Sparkster, one of the Contra games. I never did find Brain Dead 13. I looked all over for it. I've been watching one on eBay for a while, and before I left the con, I bought that on eBay. Brand new. I also bought The Great Waldo Search on eBay because I could not find that one anywhere at this con. The greatest NES game of all time. It's actually a really uncommon game. It's the yellow cart, not the blue. So for this $100 challenge, for this con alone, total value over $1,600. This is the end of the $100 challenge. Well, there's one episode coming. It'll talk about the best of, kind of looking back at everything. This is the Portland Retro Gaming Expo 2024. I had a lot of fun, got some great games, and I'm ending the $100 challenge on a high note. What jackpot am I landing on? Find out in the finale. Thank you so much for watching. Have fun. Go game. See you guys next on the $100 challenge.